You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Life is full of monsters. You know that?
Yeah.
Life is full of monsters. We know that to be true because we've experienced it. If you've been around for any amount of time whatsoever, and if you're here this morning, you certainly have, you know that life is full of monsters. Whether it is a specific individual or individuals that have influence in your life, we all have these circles that go around us, and we have certain people that we allow to come into those spheres of influence that do have some influence in our lives. And those circles are relatively small. Now, if you play the social media game, then obviously your circles are much larger, and you run the risk of allowing a lot more people into those circles that could end up bringing harm and influencing in a negative way. And sometimes maybe we've been those monsters in the past. Maybe we've been those people that have influenced others in a negative way. So monsters that we face, it could be people, it could be groups of people, perhaps maybe it is tragedies. There is no shortage of tragedies in this world, is there?
That's right.
We see it almost every single day, whether it's at the FedEx place in Indianapolis or whether it's at a school. We have gun violence, we have all of them. Just the tragic stuff that we get bombarded with on a daily basis. Those things are monsters that we face. Maybe it is unfortunate events that take place in our lives, where we lose our jobs perhaps. You get a pay cut at work. Maybe the place that you work at shuts down. The factory closes, or maybe it moves to another state or to another country. Your child begins to fail in school, begins to fail classes. Maybe he begins or she fails in athletics. Perhaps even your health begins to fail. Health problems, health issues that seem to come out of nowhere sometimes. These are monsters that we have to deal with in life. Now, all of a sudden, we see it with COVID-19, the pandemic that we've been in over the last year. What a monster that thing has been, right? And how it's affected us. Our physical health, our social health, our gatherings, being around loved ones. So these are monsters. They are real monsters that we face. And the monsters are lurking, and they are waiting. And they will always be there. Again, that's life. The older folks will tell you, they've been around long enough and experienced it. Those things happen. Again, that is life, and we all know that. In John chapter 16, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And he said, in the world, you will have tribulation. You will, not you might have it, you may have it occasionally. He says, no, you will have tribulation.
Yes.
But be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. So they will always be there. And we can't just simply be protected from them. My mother was very overprotective of me and my sister growing up. And if you ever meet her, and she might be here next Sunday actually, she's coming up to see our kids, our grandbabies. And if you ever watch her around the grandbabies, you'll pick up on that overprotective nature that she has. So growing up, while other kids were riding four-wheelers and dirt bikes and ATVs and doing all these things, we were never allowed to do it. because we might get hurt. They're dangerous. I wasn't allowed to cross the road until I was like in middle school. I was in 5th or 6th grade. Had girlfriends, and they would want to go cross the street to go do something on the other side of the road, and I couldn't do it. Very embarrassing as a 5th grader or a 6th grader. But she was a very overprotective person. She tried to protect us from any possible danger that might exist. People in general today are overprotective. Much more so today than 50 years ago or 100 years ago. We live in a very overprotective society where safety is elevated, even above liberty, right? Even above our freedoms. We put safety over freedoms and liberties, where any exposure to anything threatening or potentially dangerous is viewed as something that cannot happen. No threats can be allowed. So you see this type of attitude and behavior on our college campuses today, with kids growing up where they've created safe spaces. So if the presidential candidate doesn't get elected that they were rooting for, they can go into a safe space, where they can go and yell and color and scream and do all sorts of different things to make themselves feel better. And they've got these terminologies today, trigger warnings. They can't, even Dr. Seuss today is too threatening and too dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Even Dr. Seuss poses too much of a threat to the minds of young children across our country. Our development as human beings, it works much like the development of our immune systems. And I wrote about this recently in one of our newsletters at the Lion's Den. Our immune systems and how incredible they are. These machines that we have inside of us, that we're born with, that protects us from viruses and diseases and different things. But in order for our immune systems to function properly, they have to be exposed to all sorts of different things.
Amen.
They get exposed to bacteria whenever we're kids, and different viruses. And our immune systems learn about that virus. The chicken pox, you can only get chicken pox once, right? Because once you get it, your immune system learns about it, and then it figures out how to fight against it in the future. So as we have made all of this progress in our country, and good progress, but we're much cleaner today than we used to be. We have antibacterial soap, we have antibiotics, we have all of these different things. The only problem with that is that we've gotten so clean, we've removed so much of the exposure that we need to certain bacteria, that now children are growing up with more problems, more allergies. They have more allergic reactions to things. People in third world countries don't have the same issues with allergies that we have here in this country. Now, they have much worse problems, and I'm not saying that I necessarily envy them for that, because we all know that we've got it really good here. There's no doubt about that. But as you remove all of the exposure, and then children also aren't playing outside like they used to. They're on tablets and smartphones. They're not around other children. They're not out in the elements. They're not being exposed to the bacteria, to all the things that they need to be exposed to develop good, strong immune systems. And an allergy, by the way, is when your immune system overreacts to something. Whether it's peanuts, or fish, or pollen, your immune system has an overreaction. because, again, it hasn't developed those defenses for it. Now, don't we live in an overreactive society where people overreact to the stupidest things? Like Dr. Seuss.
That's
We
right.
overreact to everything today. So, me and Brittany, we were talking about our children, Malachi and Micah, and how they're in school now, and all of the difficulties of being in school. And I don't miss being in school. I don't miss high school or grade school or middle school. I don't miss any of it. I don't miss any of it.
That's
No nostalgic memories for me. But we were talking about our children and how, we hope that they're popular. We would like for our children to grow up and be popular and have friends and feel like they're accepted and get along well with other kids. Now, there are some difficulties that come along with that. Popular kids are more social. They get out more and socialize more. And in social activities, you find a lot of bad stuff, drugs and alcohol, and the pressures that come along with being popular. And so there are certainly some negatives to that. There are also negatives to not being popular, not feeling like you fit in, feeling like you don't have friends, and the depression, the rejection that you can feel. It's like Jeff says, there's a ditch on both sides of the road,
That's right.
And we were talking about our kids and whether they'll have friends and whether they'll be popular and what we can do. And I said that there is nothing that we can do to make sure that our children have friends. There's nothing that we can do to make sure that our children are popular. But what we can do is we can make sure that our children can handle not being popular if that is the case. They can handle not having friends if that ends up being the case. There is no protection from everything. We simply can't do it. The monsters always come in.
Yes.
The monsters are always there. We can't just simply protect our children from them. But what we have to do is teach them how to deal with it. We have to raise up competent people who can handle all of these different difficulties in life. So we should make sure that we are strengthening ourselves and our children to be able to deal with everything that life throws at us. So since we can't avoid them, we're going to have to deal with them. Again, that's life, isn't it? We're going to have to deal with them. And I think that's why so many people love the Marvel superhero movies, like Iron Man and Spider-Man and Superman and Batman. All of these movies where you have the hero and you've got the monsters. And the hero rises up and conquers the bad guys, conquers the villains.
Yes.
Like, we love those stories because those stories speak to something that is true in our own lives. At least something that we want to be true in our lives. The heroes who rise up and they conquer and they overcome the villains in the story. Here's some things that you'll notice about the heroes in these movies. They are formidable, they are competent, they have courage, they are strong, not just physically, but they are mentally strong. But they all had to become that. They didn't just start out that way. The story of Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he's a geek, and he gets bullied by the kids, and he doesn't have friends, and then something happens to him in his life, and that changes. And in the story, he gets bit by a spider, I think, right? Is that how the Spider-Man story goes? Bit by a spider, and it changes him. But he changes. And it's not just the Marvel superhero movies. Lots of movies have that storyline. Did anybody grow up watching Die Hard with Bruce Willis? John McClain, John Wayne, right? Yep, John Wayne for the other generation. Maybe a little bit older, not by much, but maybe slightly. James Bond, Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. You have these guys who are the good monsters, who are the good guys, and they rise up and they conquer the bad monsters, and by doing so, they make the world a better place. They make the world a better place. Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that? Maybe not that drastic where there's missiles being launched, like in these action movies from Hollywood and buildings are on fire and people are flying and have superpowers. But why wouldn't we do that? Because we know that we can make the world a better place. We can make the world a better place. You want to talk about finding your purpose in life, and people struggle with that. I don't know what I'm called to do. I don't know what my purpose is here on this earth. Your purpose is to make the world a better place.
Yes, it is.
It's to bring heaven right here on earth.
Yes.
Oh, I can't do that though. What can I do as I work my mundane job and I don't have all that much influence or money? How can I do it? Oh, you can absolutely do it. How? Well, you can be friendly to your cashier when you're checking out at Walmart. And you can tip your waitress very, very good. Dr. Tim Patterson was talking about tipping well, right? Tipping your waitress and your waiters. You can call someone that you love and you can check on them. And you can let them know that you love them and care about them. There are lots of things that we can all do, that we have the power to do to make the world a better place. That's always my message to the Lion's Den people. As they come into our ministry from drugs and alcohol, I say that we've done plenty of things to make the world worse. And they all know that. And I know that. I've done lots of things in my life to make this world a worse place to live in. Amen. So why wouldn't we change that? And why wouldn't we set our sights on making the world a little bit better every single day that we live and setting our minds to that? So in order for us to do this, we have to be strong, we have to be courageous, we have to be determined.
Yes.
How many times in Scripture are we told to be strong, be courageous,
Yes.
do not be afraid, regardless of what's going on, regardless of how bizarre the world seems to be getting, how unusual things seem to be around us. Turn with me to Jeremiah chapter 12. We're going to look at one verse in Jeremiah 12. So in Jeremiah chapter 12, as you guys are getting there, Jeremiah is complaining to God. How many of us complain to God sometimes?
Yes.
He's complaining, he's lamenting about how unfair life seems to be. He is seeing all of these wicked people prospering around him. Now that is one of the great mysteries of life, is why do the wicked prosper? Why do they do well? But Jeremiah is complaining. He's asking, why is life unfair? Things aren't going the way that Jeremiah wants them to go. And here God's response in verse 5. God says this: if you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, then how can you contend with horses? And if in the land of peace in which you trusted they wearied you, then how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? God says that if you feel like quitting right now, what's going to happen when things get tougher? Because they will. It will get tougher. The wicked prospering, that's ordinary. The wicked have always prospered for whatever reason. There's nothing unusual about that. That is run-of-the-mill stuff that he has just been bothered with. But there will be things coming in the future, God is saying, that aren't ordinary, that are extremely unusual, that you will have to contend with. You will have to contend with it, because the world simply is not an easy place. How will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? The Jordan River would overflow during flood season, and the waters would come up, and it would flood into a plain, and that plain would grow up into a thicket. You know what a thicket is?
Yes.
Brush and shrubs and trees, and it's very thick. Have you ever walked in a thicket?
Yes.
You can't see where you're going. You don't know what's in there. It's tough. It's tough walking. So you have these flood waters that would overwhelm you and threaten you, and now you've got this thicket to deal with. What's in the thicket? I don't know. There could be monsters in that thicket.
Yep.
There could be wild animals in the thicket that could tear you to pieces. There could be really bad things in the thicket. So God's response to Jeremiah essentially was, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You're upset and you're complaining over something that's relatively ordinary, when things are going to get more difficult for you in the future. And if you get worn out in the land of peace, if you get worn out in the land of peace that you're currently living in, then how are you going to be able to contend with that in the future?
Yes, that's right.
The answer is you will not be able to. And that's a problem. That's a really big problem. Let's go really quick to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. And this is the story of David and Goliath. And this really is the introduction of David in world history. In the previous chapter, chapter 16, we're introduced to David. And David was born for such a time as this. This was his time, his moment in world history, in biblical history, and he was ready for it. There was a monster on the loose in Israel. Chapter 17, starting in verse 4. We'll read down through verse 11. And it says, and a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had a bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I rebel against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So we have this man who was a Philistine, and he was 9 feet 9 inches tall. So he wasn't run of the mill. This isn't like the wicked are doing well, like Jeremiah was complaining about and up against. No, this is something much different than that. Goliath was not an ordinary soldier. He came forth in between the two armies of Israel and the Philistines. And he came and presented himself and challenged the mightiest man of his enemies to a fight. So he didn't fight the same way as the rest of the soldiers fought. This was an unusual foe that David was up against. And it feels like today that we're up against some very unusual foes that aren't ordinary and run of the mill. So he's up against Goliath, and all of the other men were greatly afraid. They were up against a literal monster, and they weren't doing so well with it. Let's skip down to verse number 20. And it says, "David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them." David heard the monster spewing his threats and his insults against the Israelites. And he heard that. And David said basically, yes, you are a monster. And yes, you are somebody who must be contended with. But guess what? Me too. Me too. I'm somebody that you're going to have to contend with. I'm someone that you're going to have to deal with. David was the original action hero of his time.
Yes.
He said, you know what? You have insulted my people. You have insulted my God. And there is going to be a price to pay. I'm not going to roll over for you. When Jesus saw the temple being dishonored by those who were buying and selling goods, he didn't just roll over for them. He went inside and started flipping some tables, right? You dishonor my Father's house. That ain't cool. David says, you dishonor my people and my God. And there's going to be a price to pay. I'm not rolling over for you. I'm going to take a stand for what is right. And don't we need that in this country today?
Yes.
People that will take a stand for what is right.
Amen.
No matter what. And then he says, let no man's heart fail before him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. He said, I'm ready. I'm prepared. And then we get into why and how he's ready and prepared. Skip down to verse 33. Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth." Always the naysayers, always the doubters, always somebody standing right next to you, doubting your abilities, doubting that you're capable. So he's got this guy in his ear saying you can't do it. And then he says to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover," David said, "the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." So David then goes against the monster, and we all know the story, right?
Yes.
He conquers and slays the giant. He conquers the monster. There's a couple reasons why he's able to do this. Actually, more reasons than that, but I'm going to give you a couple this morning from what we just read. Number one is that David in his life did the things necessary to become someone who must be contended with in life. He developed properly. So I talked earlier about the immune system and about overprotection. So David wasn't overprotected. He was able to wrestle and fight lions and bears as a kid. Now, I'm not advocating that necessarily, that we allow our children to go wrestle bears and lions. Maybe, maybe not. But he was exposed to things. He was exposed to difficulties, and he overcame those difficulties. And he did it privately before he did it publicly. He did it privately when no one was watching. There was no crowd of people around whenever he fought the lion and fought the bear. And it would have been very easy for David to say, it's just one lamb, and it's a bear or a lion. I think people would understand, right? The bear or lion took the one lamb, but no, not David. He could have quit. He could have ran the other way. Nobody was watching. No crowd was there looking. But instead, what did he do? He ran after it. He faced that challenge in his life, and he overcame it. And he knew that he could do it. And he passed the test privately. And then God allowed him the opportunity publicly, while many were watching. He wasn't born that way. Nobody is born that way. You must become that way. David grew up and became that type of person.
All right.
He was preparing himself.
Yes.
He was strengthening himself. He was doing the right thing, no matter how difficult the task was. A lion and a bear, that's difficult. But David knew what the right thing was to do, and he did it. That's number one. Number two is, he came in the name of the Lord of hosts,
Yes, yes, he did.
the God of the armies of Israel. Those are two great things he had going for him. I tell people at the Lions Den that there is nothing virtuous about being a weak pushover. that just get steamrolled by life. Those people don't make the world a better place. That can't face any type of obstacle or difficulty. They just become scared Israelites who run and hide and get afraid every time things get tough. People who have a heart for God and people who have conviction make the world a better place.
Yes.
Becoming tough and resilient, it takes work. It doesn't just happen overnight. It didn't just happen for David overnight. He didn't become that person who could go up against an unusual foe, an unusual monster like Goliath overnight. But it takes work, it takes commitment, it takes dedication, staying the course no matter what, doing the right things no matter what, and just being up to the task. Being men and women of God who are up for the task, who say, "Here am I, Lord, send me."
Yes.
Like Esther, and it says in the book of Esther that she was born for such a time as this. It's a great attitude to have. That we were born for such a time as this. In 2021, in the United States of America, during a pandemic and racial unrest and all of these things, we were born for such a time as this, right here and right now.
Yes.
So if you see yourself as someone who must be contended with in this world, a difficult world, and you come in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, we will be successful people. We will make a difference in this world. And we will make this world a better place to be in.
Yes.
So with that being said, Greg, you want to come up and we'll go ahead and close out the service. Yes, we have to be meek and we have to be humble. That's for sure. That is part of the fruit of the Spirit. But the apostles and Jesus Christ, these weren't people who just allowed life to steamroll over them. They took a stand for what was right. They were beaten. They were stoned. They were shipwrecked. They faced many, many monsters in their lives. But yet they kept moving forward.
Yes.
They kept moving forward. They kept overcoming until the very, very end.
Yes.
And by doing so, they made this world a better place. So we're going to go ahead and open up the altars like we always do. If you have some business to take care of with the Lord, of course, now's the time to do it. If anybody needs prayer as we close, you can come up for that.